Officer Connor and his rookie partner, Lenny, drove through the city streets in their patrol car. The air inside the vehicle was thick with tension as Connor spoke about the recent changes in the police department's leadership. "Can you believe they put one of them in charge?" Connor spat, his knuckles tightening around the steering wheel. "This department's going straight to hell in a handbasket." Lenny shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd only been on the force for a few months, but Connor's blatant racism made him uneasy. "Maybe we should give the new captain a chance," he suggested cautiously. Connor scoffed. "You're too naive, kid. They're all the same, you can't trust any of them." As they turned onto the main street, Connor's eyes narrowed. A sleek black sedan caught his attention. The driver, a well-dressed black man, was following all the traffic laws, but something about him rubbed Connor the wrong way. "Look at that car," Connor muttered. "I bet he stole it." Lenny frowned. "We don't know that, sir. He's not doing anything wrong." "Is that what you think?" Connor shot back, flipping on the patrol car's lights. "Time for a little routine check." The black sedan smoothly pulled over. Lenny could see the driver's shoulders tense as Connor stepped out of the patrol car. "Sir, please," Lenny pleaded. "This doesn't feel right." Connor ignored him, striding toward the sedan with a smug grin on his face. Lenny reluctantly followed, his stomach twisting with discomfort. As they approached the open driver's window, the man inside was composed but cautious, his eyes flicking between the two officers. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked calmly. Connor leaned in, getting inches from the man's face. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone dripping with disdain. The driver complied, handing over his documents without protest. Lenny noticed the man's hands were trembling slightly. "Deandre Johnson," Connor read aloud, his lips curling. "And what brings you to this neighborhood, Mr. Johnson?" "I'm on my way to a meeting," Deandre replied evenly. "Is there a reason you pulled me over?" Connor's eyes narrowed. "We ask the questions here. Step out of the vehicle." Deandre hesitated, glancing at Lenny, who looked away, ashamed. Slowly, Deandre opened the car door and stepped out. Lenny could feel the tension rising. He knew this was wrong, but he didn't know how to stop it as Connor began his invasive questioning. Lenny's mind raced, trying to find a way to calm the situation before it spiraled out of control. They didn't know that this routine traffic stop was about to change their lives forever. Connor circled Deandre's car like a predator stalking its prey. His eyes scanned every inch of the vehicle, looking for any excuse to escalate the situation. "Nice car you got here, Mr. Johnson," Connor sneered. "How does someone like you afford something like this?" Deandre took a deep breath, keeping his composure. "I work hard for it, I'm a financial officer. I'm on my way to an important meeting. Can you tell me why I was stopped?" Connor ignored the question, his hand resting on the gun in his holster. "If we take a look inside, do you mind?" "Actually, I do," Deandre responded firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't consent to a search." Connor's face twisted in anger. "Oh, you've got something to hide, don't you?" Without warning, Connor yanked the car door open and began rifling through the vehicle. Deandre stepped forward to protest, but Lenny quickly moved between them. "Sir, please stay back," Lenny said, his voice slightly trembling. As Connor searched, he discreetly pulled a small bag of white powder from his pocket and placed it on the driver's seat. Lenny saw the movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart raced as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just racial profiling anymore, this was a setup. Well, Connor announced, emerging triumphantly from the car with the bag. "What do we have here?" Deandre's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not mine. You just planted that there." Connor grinned maliciously. "Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer. You're under arrest." As Connor reached for his handcuffs, Deandre's calm facade finally broke. "This is ridiculous. I'm telling you, that's not mine." Lenny felt sick to his stomach. He knew what he was witnessing was wrong, a blatant abuse of power. His father's words echoed in his mind, "A real officer protects and serves all people, son, not just those who look like us." The tension in the air was palpable. Deandre, realizing the gravity of the situation, looked at Lenny with pleading eyes. "Officer, you saw what happened. Tell him this isn't right." Connor turned, glaring at Lenny. "Don't listen to him, rookie. This is how we clean up the streets." Lenny froze, torn between his duty to his partner and his moral obligation to uphold justice. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, forcing him to make a decision that would change the course of his career and perhaps his life. As Connor moved to cuff Deandre, the situation teetered on the brink of explosion. The next few moments would determine whether justice would prevail or if an innocent man's life would be destroyed by prejudice and unchecked corruption. The world seemed to slow down as Lenny watched Connor reach for his handcuffs. In that moment, a flood of memories washed over him, his father's proud smile when he graduated from the police academy, the countless stories of integrity and honor he had grown up hearing, the oath he had taken to protect and serve. "Stop!" Lenny's voice rang out, surprising even himself with its firmness. Connor froze, his hand halfway to Deandre's wrist. "What did you say, rookie?" Lenny stepped forward, placing himself between his partner and Deandre. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve grew stronger with every passing second. "I said stop, Officer Connor. This isn't right, and you know it." Connor's face twisted in anger. "Listen here, you little punk, I've been on this force longer than you've been alive. You can't tell me what's right or wrong." "Maybe not," Lenny replied, standing his ground. "But I know what I saw. You planted that evidence. This man is innocent." Deandre was still tense, but now there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He remained silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Connor's voice dropped to a menacing growl. "You're making a big mistake, kid. I can end your career right here and now. Is that what you want?" For a split second, doubt crept into Lenny's mind. His dream had always been to be a cop and make a difference. Was he really willing to throw it all away? But then he looked at Deandre, saw the fear and desperation in his eyes, and knew he couldn't back down. If standing up for what's right means losing my job, then so be it. I won't be a part of this. Connor's face flushed with fury. He jabbed a finger into Lenny's chest. "You're finished. You hear me? I'll make sure you never wear a badge again." Lenny stood his ground, his voice steady. "Go ahead, but I'm not moving, and you're not arresting this man on false charges." The tension between the two officers was palpable. Sensing an opportunity, Deandre tried to defuse the situation. "Officers, please, there's no need for this to escalate. We can resolve this peacefully," Deandre said. "Shut your mouth, Deandre. You don't get to speak." Connor snapped, but Lenny found the courage to place a hand on Connor's shoulder, pulling him back. "That's enough. He has rights, and you're violating them." The older cop shoved Lenny's hand away. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, kid. Don't think I won't report this insubordination." Lenny remained firm, his father's words echoing in his ears. "I'd rather lose my job than lose my integrity." As the confrontation reached its boiling point, neither of them realized that this moment would be the catalyst for change far beyond this single traffic stop. Lenny's stand against injustice was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of his police department and the community. The air crackled with tension as Connor, Lenny, and Deandre stood locked in their standoff. Traffic slowed as cars passed by, watching the scene unfold on the side of the road. Seeing no other way out, Deandre decided to take a risk. "Officers," he said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I think there's something you both need to know. Connor sneered. Save it for the judge, pal. But Deandre pressed on. I'm Captain Deandre Johnson, the new head of your precinct. The words hung in the air for a moment before their impact hit. Connor's face went pale while Lenny's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible, Connor stammered, his bravado evaporating. Deandre slowly reached into his jacket, causing both officers to pause, but he only pulled out his badge and ID. I was on my way to headquarters to meet with the commissioner when you stopped me. Lenny took the badge, examining it closely before handing it to Connor. The older officer's hands trembled as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. I didn't know, Connor muttered, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Deandre's eyes hardened. Would it have made a difference if you did? Every citizen deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their position or the color of their skin. Desperate to salvage the situation, Connor started backpedaling. Captain, I can explain. See, we've had reports of drug trafficking in this area, and... Stop. Deandre cut him off. I saw you plant those drugs in my car, officer. He turned to Lenny. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Lenny, sir. Lenny Thompson. Officer Thompson, you saw it too, didn't you? Lenny nodded, a mix of relief and resolve. Yes, sir, I did. Connor's desperation turned to rage. He lashed out at Lenny. You little rat. After everything I've taught you, you're going to side with him? I'm siding with the truth, Lenny replied firmly. Deandre stepped between them. That's enough, Officer Connor. Your actions today not only violated department policy but also the law. You're suspended effective immediately. Hand over your badge and leave. Connor's face twisted in anger. You can't do this to me. I've dedicated 20 years to this force. And in those 20 years, how many innocent lives have you ruined? Deandre asked quietly. How many people have suffered because of your prejudice? The weight of those questions seemed to crush Connor. His shoulders slumped as the reality of his actions finally hit him. As Deandre called for backup, a small crowd had gathered, many with phones in hand recording the scene. The story of a corrupt cop caught in the act by the very man he was trying to frame was about to go viral. Lenny, still processing everything that had happened, turned to Deandre. Sir, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Deandre placed a reassuring hand on Lenny's shoulder. You did the right thing when it counted, Officer Thompson. That's what matters. As they waited for reinforcements, both men knew this was only the beginning. The revelation of Captain Johnson's identity set the stage for a much larger confrontation that would force their department and city to face issues of racism and corruption head-on. The small crowd of onlookers grew as the confrontation between Deandre, Connor, and Lenny played out. Phones were held high, capturing every moment of the scene. The quiet suburban street had become an impromptu stage for a drama that would soon captivate the entire city. Hey, isn't that the new police captain? Someone in the crowd whispered loudly. The murmur spread quickly, and soon people were shouting encouragements to Deandre and Lenny while hurling insults at Connor. Justice for Captain Johnson. Arrest the crooked cop. We're with you, Captain. The chorus of voices grew louder, the energy of the crowd palpable. Connor, his face a mask of anger and fear, looked around wildly, realizing he was outnumbered and exposed. Amid the commotion, the voice of a boy cut through the noise. Dad! Deandre's head snapped toward his car. In the back seat, previously unnoticed in the chaos, was his 10-year-old son, Marcus. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and confusion as he watched the scene unfold. Deandre's heart sank. In all the tension, he had momentarily forgotten that his son was with him, on the way to be dropped off at a friend's house before the important meeting. Now, Marcus was witnessing firsthand the harsh reality of the world Deandre had tried to shield him from. It's okay, Marcus, Deandre called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everything's going to be fine. Stay in the car, okay?" Marcus nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Connor, who was now backing away from the growing crowd. Lenny noticed the boy and instinctively moved to stand between the car and Connor, his protective instincts kicking in as the situation escalated. Local news vans began to arrive, drawn by the social media frenzy that was already spreading. Reporters pushed through the crowd, shouting questions. "Captain Johnson, can you comment on what's happening here? Officer, are you being wrongfully detained? Is this a case of racial profiling gone wrong?" Deandre raised his hands, trying to calm the crowd and the press. "Please, everyone step back. This is an ongoing police matter. We'll address all questions in due time." But the crowd was not to be silenced. Years of pent-up frustration with police misconduct were coming to the surface. People began sharing their own stories of mistreatment and prejudice, each account fueling the anger of those around them. Connor, overwhelmed by the turn of events, made a desperate dash toward his patrol car. "This is all a misunderstanding," he shouted. "I was just doing my job." But his words only further enraged the crowd. "No justice, no peace." They began to chant, the words echoing down the street. Lenny, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, radioed in. "We need additional units for crowd control at our location. The situation is tense but currently non-violent." Deandre, torn between his roles as a father, police captain, and a black man facing injustice, took a deep breath. He knew his next actions would set the tone not just for this incident, but for his entire tenure as captain. As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of reinforcements, Deandre braced himself. This was no longer just a traffic stop gone wrong. It had become a flashpoint for the community's long-simmering grievances. A moment that would define the relationship between the police and the people they swore to protect. The eyes of the city were on them, and the world was about to take notice. The blaring of sirens grew louder as police vehicles sped toward the scene. Lenny, realizing the volatile nature of the situation, ran toward the arriving cars, waving his arms to get their attention. "Over here!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. As the first patrol car skidded to a halt, two officers jumped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. They surveyed the scene in confusion, taking in the angry crowd, the cornered Connor, and Deandre standing calmly at the center of it all. "What's going on here?" demanded Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior officer of the newly arrived backup. Lenny, out of breath, began to explain. "We've got a situation. Officer Connor conducted an illegal stop and tried to plant evidence. The man he stopped is actually Captain Johnson, our new precinct leader." Rodriguez's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're serious, Thompson?" Meanwhile, Connor, seeing his opportunity slipping away, made a desperate move. He lunged for the planted bag of drugs, intending to destroy the evidence of his misconduct. "He's going for the drugs!" someone in the crowd shouted. Deandre, alert to the danger, sprang into action with the speed and precision honed by years of training. He tackled Connor to the ground, pinning him down firmly. "Officer Connor, you're under arrest," Deandre announced, his voice cutting through the now silent crowd. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd erupted in applause as Sergeant Rodriguez rushed over to assist with the arrest. Lenny, relieved, stepped forward to help. Connor, now handcuffed and escorted to a patrol car, began shouting. "This is a setup. You can't do this to me, I have rights." Maintaining his composure, Deandre turned to address the gathering of officers and civilians. "Everyone, please remain calm. The situation is now under control. We will be conducting a full investigation into today's events, and I assure you, justice will be served." The newly arrived officers, still trying to piece together what had happened, began dispersing the crowd. News cameras captured every dramatic moment. Lenny, his adrenaline finally subsiding, approached Deandre. "Sir, I want you to know I'm prepared to give a full statement about what I witnessed today." Deandre nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "Thank you, Officer Thompson. Your integrity today is exactly what this department needs." As the chaos began to subside, Deandre remembered his son. He quickly ran back to his car, opening the back door. "Marcus, are you okay?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, what's going to happen now?" Deandre pulled his son into a tight embrace. "We're going to make things right. That's what I've been fighting for, son. That's why my job is so important." As father and son embraced, Sergeant Rodriguez approached the captain. "The press is asking for a statement, and the commissioner is on his way." Deandre took a deep breath. He knew the real battle was just beginning. Connor's arrest was only the first step in addressing the systemic issues plaguing the department. Looking from Lenny, to his son, and finally to the diverse crowd of citizens watching with anticipation, Deandre squared his shoulders. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope for real change. Reinforcements arrived, not just in the form of additional officers, but in the awakening of a community ready to stand up for justice. The real work was about to begin. As the scene stabilized, the air remained thick with tension. The commissioner's car pulled up, lights flashing. Commissioner Holt, a stern-faced man in his 60s, stepped out of the vehicle. His expression was a mix of concern and irritation. "Captain Johnson," he called out, striding toward Deandre, "what in God's name is going on here?" Deandre stood tall, meeting the commissioner's gaze. "Sir, we had an incident involving Officer Connor. He conducted an illegal stop and attempted to plant evidence." Holt's eyebrows shot up. "Those are serious accusations, Captain. Do you have proof?" "I do." Lenny stepped forward, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I witnessed the entire incident, sir. Officer Connor planted drugs in Captain Johnson's vehicle." The commissioner's gaze shifted between Deandre, Lenny, and the patrol car where Connor sat, his face a mask of anger and fear. "This is a nightmare," Holt muttered, then louder, "All right, I want statements from everyone involved, and somebody get these news cameras out of here." But it was too late. The story was already spreading like wildfire on social media. Smartphones had captured every moment as Connor was led from the patrol car to face the commissioner. "This is all a misunderstanding," Connor shouted, his composure finally cracking. "You can't seriously believe this. He's a rookie, and this guy just showed up claiming to be the captain." Deandre stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. "I'm Captain Deandre Johnson, and I was on my way to meet the commissioner when you illegally stopped me and tried to frame me for drug possession." The crowd, momentarily silenced by the commissioner's arrival, began murmuring again. Cries of "justice" and "lock him up" echoed among the gathered onlookers. Commissioner Holt raised his hands, calling for silence. "This situation will be handled according to protocol. Officer Connor, you are suspended pending a full investigation." "I need a complete report on my desk by tomorrow morning," Commissioner Holt said. Connor's face twisted in rage. "Is this how you're going to treat me, Holt? After all these years? You know how things work on the streets. Sometimes, you have to bend the rules to get results." A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who had been shouting for Connor's arrest moments earlier were shocked by his admission. Deandre stepped closer to Connor, his voice low but cutting through the sudden silence. "The rules aren't meant to be broken, Connor. They're meant to protect everyone, including the officers who uphold them. Your actions today, and apparently for years before, not only violated the law but also eroded the trust between the police and the community we swore to protect." Lenny, encouraged by Deandre's words, spoke up. "Sir," he addressed the commissioner, I'm ready to give a full statement on today's events and other incidents I've witnessed during my time with Officer Connor." Connor lunged at Lenny, his face flushed with fury. "You rat, I'll..." In the end, several officers rushed to restrain Connor, who continued to shout threats and obscenities. Commissioner Holt nodded to the officers. "Get him out of here and make sure he's charged with attempted assault on an officer, among other things." As Connor was dragged away, still yelling, Deandre turned to the crowd. "I know many of you have lost faith in law enforcement. What happened here today is inexcusable, but I promise you that under my leadership, we will root out corruption, confront racial bias, and work tirelessly to rebuild trust in our community." The crowd's angry shouts slowly turned into cautious applause. It wasn't full endorsement, but it was a start. As the scene began to disperse, Deandre caught Lenny's eye. The young officer stood a little taller, knowing he had made the right choice. The road ahead would be difficult, but today proved that change was possible, one courageous act at a time. The confrontation was over, but the real work of reforming the department and healing the community was just beginning. The incident had exposed years of systemic problems within the police force. Connor, stripped of his badge and gun, now sat in a cell, a far cry from the arrogant officer he had been just days earlier. His indictment became a media circus, with protesters gathering outside the courthouse demanding justice. Inside the courtroom, Connor's facade of righteousness crumbled as the evidence against him mounted. Lenny's testimony was damning, providing a first-hand account of the attempted setup, but what followed truly sealed Connor's fate. Inspired by Lenny's bravery, other officers came forward with their own stories. Years of Connor's misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power were laid bare. Each new revelation sent shockwaves through the department and the community. "Your Honor," the prosecutor addressed the judge, "what we have here is not just an isolated incident but a pattern of behavior that has eroded the very foundation of trust between law enforcement and the citizens they are sworn to protect." Connor's attorney tried to portray him as a relic from another time, a by-the-book cop struggling to adapt to changing standards. But the evidence was overwhelming. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, Deandre sat in the gallery, his face a mask of calm determination. Beside him, Lenny shifted nervously, the weight of his testimony heavy on his shoulders. "Officer Connor," the judge began, her voice resolute, "your actions not only broke the law but betrayed the trust placed in you by this community. You used your position of authority to intimidate and discriminate, rather than to protect and serve." The courtroom held its breath as the judge continued. "Therefore, I find you guilty on all counts. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 3 years. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding any law enforcement position." A collective sigh swept through the courtroom, followed by a mix of cheers and shocked murmurs. Connor, his face pale, was led away in handcuffs, no longer shouting or protesting but silent and defeated. Outside the courthouse, Deandre addressed the waiting press and concerned citizens. "Today, justice was served," he began, his voice firm and resolute, "but this is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead to rebuild trust and ensure that what happened with Officer Connor never happens again." He turned to Lenny, who was nearby, still processing the events. Officers like Lenny Thompson, who had the courage to stand up for what is right, represent the future of our department. Moving forward, we will foster a culture of accountability and integrity. As the crowd dispersed, a mixture of hope and skepticism hung in the air. Connor's downfall was a significant victory, but it also exposed deep-seated issues that wouldn't be resolved overnight. Deandre and Lenny shared a meaningful look, both knew that the real work was just beginning. The department needed to be rebuilt from the ground up, and they were committed to seeing it through. As they headed back to their patrol car, Deandre placed a hand on Lenny's shoulder. "You did well, Thompson. Your father would be proud." Lenny nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. For the first time since joining the force, he felt he was truly living up to the ideals that had inspired him to become a police officer. Connor's downfall marked the end of an era but also heralded the beginning of a new one. The road ahead would be challenging, but with leaders like Deandre and officers like Lenny, there was hope for lasting change. In the weeks following Connor's conviction, the police department underwent a dramatic transformation. Captain Deandre Johnson, now firmly established in his role, focused on implementing comprehensive reforms. The precinct buzzed with activity as Deandre called a general meeting. Officers entered the briefing room, a mix of anticipation and apprehension on their faces. At the front of the room, Deandre stood with Lenny by his side. Deandre began speaking with authority and warmth. "We're at a crossroads. The events of the past few weeks have shaken our department to its core, but from this crisis comes an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild, to do better, to truly serve and protect all members of our community." He outlined his plan: mandatory bias training for all officers, a civilian oversight committee, body cameras for every patrol, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in approval. "I know change isn't easy," Deandre continued, "but it's necessary. We owe it to ourselves and to the community we serve." When the meeting ended, Lenny found himself surrounded by fellow officers, many congratulating him on his bravery, others seeking advice on navigating the department's changing landscape. In the community, the atmosphere was cautiously optimistic. Deandre made it a point to attend community events, town halls, and even local basketball games, working tirelessly to rebuild the fractured relationship between the police and the public. One evening, as Lenny was wrapping up his patrol, he spotted a familiar face: Deandre's son, Marcus, playing basketball at a local park. He stopped and got out of his car. "Hey, Marcus," Lenny called out, "mind if I join?" The boy hesitated for a moment before nodding. As they played, other neighborhood kids joined in, and soon it was a full game, with kids and a cop laughing and having fun together. Deandre arrived to pick up Marcus and couldn't help but smile at the scene. He joined the game, and for a brief moment, the weight of his responsibilities lifted as he enjoyed the simple pleasure of a neighborhood basketball game. As the sun began to set, Deandre gathered everyone around. "This is what community policing looks like," he said, gesturing to the diverse group of kids and adults. "It's about being part of the neighborhood, not just policing it." Lenny nodded, understanding. The smile on his face was for why he became a cop, not to enforce laws blindly but to be a positive presence in his community. In the months that followed, crime rates began to drop and, more importantly, community satisfaction with the police force increased. It wasn't perfect, there were still challenges and setbacks, but undeniable progress was being made. A year after the incident that started it all, Deandre stood before the graduating class of the police academy. Lenny, now a decorated officer and mentor to new recruits, sat in the front row. "You are entering a noble profession at a critical time," Deandre said to the graduates. "Your job is not just to enforce the laws, but to build trust, serve with compassion, and always stand up for what is right, even when it's hard." As the new officers received their badges, there was a sense of hope in the air. The department had gone through a period of deep self-reflection and change but emerged stronger, more transparent, and more connected to the community it served. Deandre caught Lenny's eye and nodded. They both knew the work was far from over, but they were on the right path. A new era of policing had begun, built on the foundations of integrity, accountability, and community partnership. 2 years had passed since the fateful day of Connor's arrest. Under Deandre's leadership, and with officers like Lenny setting a new standard, the police department had made significant strides in reforming its practices and rebuilding community trust. However, the shadow of the past still loomed large, especially with Connor's upcoming appeal hearing. The courtroom was packed, with media teams camped outside and a mix of supporters and protesters filling the street. Inside, Deandre and Lenny sat stoically in the gallery. Their presence was a testament to the importance of the moment. Connor, looking defeated after 2 years in prison, was brought into the courtroom. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now darted nervously around the room. His attorney argued for a reduced sentence, citing Connor's long service record and claiming he was a product of a flawed system. When it was the prosecution's turn, they did not hold back. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "Mr. Connor's actions were not isolated incidents nor were they simply the result of a flawed system. They were deliberate abuses of power that destroyed lives and eroded public trust in law enforcement. As evidence was presented, including testimonies from individuals whose lives had been negatively impacted by Connor's actions over the years, the true extent of the damage became clear: families torn apart by false arrests, careers derailed by planted evidence, and a community living in fear of those sworn to protect them." Lenny was called to testify once more, his voice steady as he recounted not only the incident involving Deandre but other instances of misconduct he had witnessed during his time as Connor's partner. When Deandre took the stand, he spoke not only as a victim of Connor's actions but as the leader of a department striving to right the wrongs of the past. "Your Honor," he said, "the damage caused by Mr. Connor goes beyond individual cases. It created a culture of distrust that we are still working to overcome. Our community deserves justice, not just for one incident, but for years of systemic abuse." As the hearing progressed, it became clear that this was about more than the fate of one man. It was about accountability, sending a message that no one is above the law, especially those entrusted to uphold it. Finally, the judge rendered the decision. "Mr. Connor, having reviewed all the evidence and testimony, I find no reason to reduce your sentence. Furthermore, in light of the additional evidence presented, I am adding 2 years to your original sentence. You will serve a total of 7 years with no possibility of parole for 5 years." A collective sigh swept through the courtroom. Connor slumped in his chair, the last remnants of his arrogance crumbling. Outside the courthouse, Deandre addressed the waiting crowd. "Today, justice has been served, not just for me, but for every member of our community who has suffered due to abuse of power. Let this also serve as a reminder that our work is far from finished. We must remain vigilant, hold ourselves accountable, and continue to fight for a system that truly serves and protects everyone, regardless of their race or background." As the crowd began to disperse, Lenny approached Deandre. "Do you think this will make a difference, sir?" Deandre nodded slowly. "It's a start, Lenny. It sends a message that times have changed, that we are committed to doing better. But real, lasting change comes from what we do every day on the streets, in our interactions with the community." They walked together towards the patrol car, ready to continue the work of building a better and fairer system. The road ahead was still long, but with each step, each act of integrity and courage, they were moving in the right direction. As they drove, the setting sun cast long shadows across the city, a reminder that, while darkness may persist, a new day always dawns, bringing with it the promise of redemption, justice, and the hope for a better tomorrow.